Good afternoon. Thank you, Sydney. We're here this afternoon to pay a bit of attention and a bit of honor to a gentleman who's been around the crowdfunding space since really the inception, prior to the Jobs Act. He was integral in crafting parts of the legislation, spent a lot of time in Washington. He's probably one of the oldest faces that we've seen. Some of us have been around, from Vince and Sarah, and certainly the man of the moment, DJ Paul, since probably the 2005, 2006 timeframe, way back when. But anyway, let me introduce our panel. Besides DJ, I've got Vince Molinari and Sarah Hanks going to come join us for their particular insights on DJ and experiences and whatnot.
DJ doesn't have any seat, does he?
Well, he can have this one.
Oh, great. We need seat. That's interesting.
Yes. Great. It's the first part of the roast. Yes, go chair.
Thank you.
Let's see. Oops, I had.
One thing's over here.
Okay.
Hold it, cool.
I don't think I brought up enough Nicorette gum for this, so we'll see.
What are we doing?
Just
Just close the thing.
thanks. It helps to know.
What can I say about DJ? I've known DJ since the early days of the crowdfunding space. He's an ascetic, he's poetic, he's eclectic, certainly, peripatetic, definitely frenetic. His background is multifaceted. He came out of real estate finance, certainly the crowd space. A filmmaker. He's applied all his wisdoms and skills into this particular area, and graciously he's exiting it by his own accord. Again, yeah. But DJ is a great pundit, a great observer of what transpired over the last 10 years in this space, and I think it'd be entertaining, it'd be helpful to have not only DJ but some of his colleagues that he's worked with over the many years in this space to reflect what they've seen, what they remember on the early days of this industry and its formation. One of the things maybe to start off, rather than hearing me, I'd love for everybody to hear DJ comment on a couple of reflections in terms of what you saw early on. How'd you get into the space? What was the seminal moment in your?
How I got into the space?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I usually say something about that I wanted to help and that this seemed like something that was worth doing, all of which is true, but the reality was there was this blonde, see? Anyway, I ended up falling into this, back into something resembling finance, having left it. My first career when I left college was as a bond salesman and trader on Wall Street in mortgage-backed securities. And then I went off to be a filmmaker, and then I kind of stopped doing that for a little while, and a friend said, so there are these guys that started a company in Santa Monica called CrowdFunder, and they, there's this law that's passed in the House, but it's going to be law, and they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they need some help. So I met with them, And their initial idea was that they wanted me. This guy only knew me as a film producer and somebody who did some philanthropy. He didn't know that I had a background in finance. He didn't know that I'd been to Washington a couple of times, and I don't think he knew that I owned a suit. He certainly didn't own one. And he said, so we're doing this, and it's passed the House, it's going to pass the Senate, it's going to become law. This is November, December of 2011. And I said, bring me up to speed, because I knew nothing about it. So you have you're spending tens of thousands of your own dollars on a burn rate every month based on a business model, based on a law that hasn't passed, it's stuck in the Senate Banking Committee. And he said, yes. I said, you need to go to Washington or send someone there to go do this, to go find out what's going on. Of course, being a Silicon Valley or Silicon Alley guy or West Coast guy, well, I don't think I've ever seen wear shoes that didn't have that where I couldn't see his toes as well. He said, no, we don't need to do that. All the information's on the internet. And I was like, that is just not how that works. So I talked him into sending me here, and I came here, and there really was a blonde in Delaware, but that's another story for another time. And I don't think I would have taken the gig if she hadn't been there, so that's fine. I haven't spoken to her in a few years.
We know who she is, by the way.
No, you don't.
I do. I know exactly who it is, but I'm not going to say anything here.
Miss Delaware of 1992, so you can go look it up.
Nowhere in Kentucky or something?
Not in Kentucky. I've never been to Kentucky. Do I look like I've ever been to Kentucky, Sydney? Do I sound like I've ever been to Kentucky? Anyway, when I got here, I didn't really know my way around. I knew a couple of people. They introduced me to some people, and very quickly it became apparent that there was a bunch of us, none of whom were really coordinated in any real way, who were trying to get, at that time we were more focused on what became Reg CF, because that was the bill that had passed the House, but that was stuck in the Senate. And I went online and I did some kind of looking around at various things, and I saw the guy sitting there, Vincent, testifying.
This is about you, remember?
No, it's not. Okay, because this, by the way, is not what I signed on for. Okay, that's not what I said. I said I'm going to come down and do a panel. So this whole thing's a little nutty. But there was a bunch of us who are all here trying to do this, and we weren't coordinating very well. So I met with a guy named Woody Neese and a couple other people. I said, let's start. We all said, I don't want to take credit for this, but that we should coordinate since we were all talking to other people. And we did that for a while, and we helped craft the law. We talked to people. We tried to move things along. We were ultimately successful. And then I think we were all shocked when it actually passed. I know I was. I think some of the other people, because I don't believe that there was a professional lobbyist among them or among this group. In fact, I'm positive that that's true. And there were people that only had some really fairly limited exposure to civics, let alone how things actually work in Washington. And
Let alone securities law.
well, we haven't even gotten to that yet. That was actually the other thing. It's amazing that this group, and what I'm talking about is what was CFP and became CIFRA, and then there are people that have been outside, how little they knew about everything. As Sarah always correctly points out, how little they knew about securities law, about legislation, about how to dress. I mean, there was which fork to use at dinner. It was an odd mix of humans but there was a camaraderie, and nobody was getting paid, or at least I don't believe anybody was, and we all really wanted to see it happen. Woody, just for the record, and I hope he's watching, has subsequently learned how to use his fork. I helped him with that, so that was good. Well, he's fairly well dressed. He's graduated from Banana, but not by much. What became apparent to me pretty early on, and to the people that are sitting up here, and we were in a minority. Once the law got passed, everybody was celebrating, and having read the law and having worked in a regulated industry, albeit at that point something like almost 20 years earlier, it was pretty clear that everything had been deferred to the SEC to, actually turn into usable regulations. These guys didn't get that. The community didn't get it. They're like, we won. We passed the law. I'm like, we're not there yet. It's going to be a little bit of time. And the general sense was that they all wanted to go out and nobody knows what crowdfunding is. We need to do a marketing campaign. We need to do an awareness campaign where you can go on the internet, talk to your tribe, whatever the hell it is that they were talking about. And I'm like, no, actually, we probably should go talk to the Securities and Exchange Commission, because they're the ones that are going to be making this. And for a couple weeks there, after it was signed, I think it was probably April 7th or so that it was signed, there was some discussion about it. I went and made an appointment at the SEC anyway. And 2 weeks later or a week and a half later, the penny dropped for this group, and they realized that that maybe we should be talking to the SEC. Who was the guy who said that we should talk to the SEC? And I said, I did. And I said, well, can you make an appointment? I was like, actually, we've got one. It was on April 20th, and I invite you all to come to the meeting. And that was the first meeting, I believe that was the first meeting of the, let's call it the crowdfunding industry or would-be crowdfunding industry and the Security and Exchange Commission. That group went on to basically become CIFRA. Some people think it happened before. I don't really care. And that was basically an advocacy group, and I make the distinction between that and a lobbying organization because, like I said, none of us were paid. So that group helped the SEC, and they helped us navigate the rather treacherous waters of turning what was a happily, hastily, but unhappily ambiguous set of statutes into the regulation that now, after 5 years, is, I guess, everything has been lit up now for, I guess it's finally for 1 year, or just about, right? So pretty close to it. So that's pretty much how that went down. My contribution is actually much smaller than some other people's. I think to the extent that Steve and Sydney bamboozled me into coming down here for this, so-called honor. I only think that I deserve it in the fact that I am leaving. Because I'm going to go do something else. So nothing becomes me like my leaving it. But there was other people that were involved, and my contribution was more that I could walk into a Democrat's office and certainly sound like a Democrat because I am one, and I could hide my rings and push my pocket square down and walk into a Republican's office and talk to them, and I would run interference to try to get things a little bit closer at the House and the Senate level. And I think that was pretty much as much as I'm comfortable taking any responsibility for. And then subsequent to that, it was just good to kind of keep people going, keep people focused on the fact that this is going to be a securities business and what that meant and the level of regulation. Because the vast majority, even more than now, and still I think it's a majority, I think Sarah said something like this earlier on the panel, and I think we all say it, the majority of the people that are involved with the space don't have securities backgrounds. And have, to some extent, I don't know if it's a majority, but certainly a plurality, let's say, have a disdain for the securities business. They think that they shouldn't have to. It's a dumb rule, says Sarah, or quote Sarah, quote the rating, and therefore they shouldn't have to follow it. And of course, that's not how it works, because that's how you get fitted with an orange jumpsuit. So I've been having that conversation for 5 years. So we've been trying to keep people a little bit on the straight and narrow. On a personal standpoint, this has been incredibly rewarding. I feel like I've been on my own West Wing episode for the last 5 years, so that's pretty cool. And more than that, I genuinely like everybody that's sitting up here with me, and I even like Steve, who's sitting out there, and some other people who are yeah, you not so much, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve. But I've met some really interesting people. I've met some really kind people. I've met some really dedicated people with much more discipline than I have, well, which is a very low bar, if I'm honest, and I'm sure my mother's watching, and I'm sure that she will attest to that. But I've also met some assholes. I've met some, there's been a lot of charlatans, and the weirdness of being in this space has been that it has attracted some really stellar human beings and a lot of hacks. And navigating among those people has been something of a challenge and certainly entertaining. I will say that for the most part, even if the people who are making mistakes out of a good place and not out of a malevolent or a fraudulent place. So that's pretty cool. I will look back on these last 5 years fondly, but I will look forward to looking back on them. So that's it, and I'll leave it there for now until somebody says something really offensive and I have to agree with them.
Hey, Vince, you and DJ collaborated, a couple moons ago. Any reflections on that time together?
Wow, this is fun, Steve. Largely because I didn't know this was actually happening. So
me neither.
That's the best part.
Yeah. So the views that I'm about to
Are you
put
gonna
forth are my
disclaim this one, too?
organization's and not my
Okay.
own.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So there's probably, and I say that with a high degree of confidence, not a more galvanizing and polarizing personality all in one than DJ, which is all wrapped in, and gosh, I can't even look at it, a massive amount of intelligence, I had to say it. And underneath it all, believe it or not, there's a whole lot of humility. And it even goes to his description. The reality of the world is when we all kind of got together by chance 5 odd years ago, it was DJ who...
There were 5 very odd years.
Like, extremely. DJ was the one who approached me. I said, what's this guy up to? And he came up to me and said, hey, I've got this meeting set up with the SEC, and I'd like you to come. And that was really the beginning of whether that was...
You want to know why, Vince?
Please.
Hand to God, you're the only other guy that was in a suit.
Perfect. But really, whether it was the suit, I don't know if hopefully I had a tie. But that was really the spirit of collaboration that started the build, whether that was CFPA or became the SWAT team of CIFRA. And that was really led by DJ. And at first blush, I said, well, this guy is probably a competitor. I'm not sure what he's doing. And largely the other people in the room were the same way. So it was that leadership and that example by DJ that I think really was the spirit of what the early days and what for several years certainly were the association, formally and informally. It was people rolling up the sleeves that had no agenda, no payments to themselves or the organization, but really trying to build something special that was a bit of a legacy. And hats off to DJ, as much as he won't admit it, had a huge part in that leadership and was the first one crazy enough to say, I'm setting up a meeting with the SEC without a subpoena, at least that we know about.
That one was out without a subpoena.
I guess one of my favorite DJ stories shall be now
The
memorialized.
blonde.
No, that one we'll stay. This is G-rated. So one of those lovely days where we happened to be with the commissioners of the SEC, having what is a phenomenally productive meeting, and I'll leave this one particular commissioner who is now retired, and most of what I will convey is the truth largely, but post that meeting there were some of us taking a train back to New York City, and that was kind of post the usual SEC meetings where you had to debrief, and part of that debriefing was perhaps having a few cocktails. It's funny how that momentum builds, and you find yourself on a train. And for the record, and I'm sorry it's not here, Doug Ellenoff, there is truth, because I can testify to this, that Doug did take a Northeast Regional and not the Excella. He was on that train with us. And some of us having a really, really grand time. Some of us not so much, but some, as you can imagine, might be louder than others. Some may be using all kinds of foul language, and some may even say being somewhat disruptive, where you might imagine a conductor coming over and saying, I think you really might want to tone it down and watch the language and all that good stuff. And in the spirit of defending one another, we all stood tall with one person. And it was really remarkable that same commissioner that we met with just a couple of hours ago was 2 seats away. And legend has it that Commissioner Gallagher did not extend his term as a result of that Northeast Regional trip down. So DJ may have credit for that one.
I don't want credit for that one, but I did get too drunk on that train. I mean, that's a fact. But that was because of a brunette, and I wasn't supposed to be on the train. I was supposed to meet someone. She blew me off, and then I ran to catch with my friends, and then I just had to drink heavily. So, and we were celebrating because I think we'd had a good meeting, but I can't remember.
Yeah,
So
it was a
but
phenomenally
it was more
good
than
meeting.
that. I mean, in as much as I was inappropriately loud. I was untoward. I was having a good time, and Gallagher actually approached us and said something about it.
You think?
Yeah, and. Shockingly, I ended up having I don't know, maybe he just didn't, I don't have one of those faces that people remember, but or maybe I look really, really different when I'm lit. But subsequent to that, I had several meetings with him, and he was gracious enough to never, ever mention it. So I will thank him for that, always. So there's that.
So Sarah, any reflections on DJ's intellectual acumen relative to some of the legislation and the legalities and...
Well, I've always been impressed with DJ's intellectual acumen. But I've been more impressed by the fact that he actually was one of the people who knows what he's talking about. I came to this world late in 2011, early in 2012, as it was obvious that something was happening on the Hill. And my previous history was I'd retired from my law firm to go and work on Capitol Hill in the financial crisis, and then run screaming from the Hill, swearing I would never, ever walk into the Russell Senate building ever again because I just could not stand it. And then a few months later, I find myself on behalf of my own company, going in and having a little chat with some senators and various representatives about this crowdfunding thing. And what was very interesting in those early days is sometimes I would walk into an office and it would be quite clear that someone who had absolutely no friggin' idea what they were doing had been talking to that person, that staffer before me, because they'd have this list of questions and say, but isn't it true that? And I go, no. But then as I sort of tried to work out who are these people, this crowd of crowdfunding lobbyists or advocates or whatever you want to call it, I started to work out that there were really some people who are not idiots and not pure opportunists, but people who really actually knew what they were doing and believed in what they were doing. And I started to identify some people, which include the guys on this platform. And so that was a very interesting development. The one thing about DJ I will say is he is the best armed liberal that I know. How many states do you have a concealed carry in?
41.
Yeah, that's. But you've never been to Kentucky.
Never been to Kentucky,
Okay,
but I
so-
can carry there. This makes me feel more comfortable about going.
So anyway, DJ is a guy that you just can't make any assumptions about. And I found that as I was learning to know and love all of these guys in this community, that you can't make assumptions. You can't assume that you're just coming from here and you don't actually know what you're doing, that you aren't actually doing something really, really good and useful and helpful. And I have come to value everybody, even those very early stage opportunists who are no longer with us, but especially DJ.
Thank you, Sarah. The idea that Sarah thinks that I know what I'm talking about speaks more to my ability to bullshit people than my ability to actually know stuff. But Sarah actually, and I say this when she's not around, knows more than everybody else that's in the space, with the possible exception of Doug Alanoff, and I'm only saying that because he is probably watching. But I don't actually think it's true.
Jonathan, any takeaways?
Well,
Hold on, John.
so, you know, for a handful of you, this is kind of your first time at one of these events. And for others, obviously, they've been there since the beginning. I wrote the book on equity crowdfunding. It came out a year after the passage of the law. So this is in April of 13. And I don't know if you've ever been to that party. You know, the party where you show up just a little bit too late and everybody's drunk as hell? That's what happened to me. So I show up a year later, and it's like everybody's whacked out of their mind, and DJ's the leader, you know? So, so I caught on, like, just at the right time. Now, something that happened right at the beginning of this is that what we really saw was this kind of group of misfit toys. Like, now you have all these finance professionals and stuff like that, and everybody's kind of adult-ish. But at the time, it was this combination of technologists from Silicon Valley. It was the finance people, generally centered in New York. And then it was kind of this Southern California vibey thing, which is how DJ got dragged into it. So he held the whole group together in this way that was really, really, like, magical. And I always, like, kind of joke that it's really nice to have, like, somebody, you know, to hold it together. But now that we don't need you anymore, we're sorry to see you leave. But we will continue.
That makes me think you don't.
But we will continue, I think, for forever and ever, whenever we're having when we're having a good time without you, to remember that the times were better with you. So I'm sorry you're leaving, and we don't believe you, but for whatever, the next year or two, have a good time and tell us a story too when you get back.
I have got to get my lance and my donkey together and find a new windmill to tilt at. This one has been lots of fun, but I won't be back. But I'm always looking for a Sancho, and you seem like you'd fit the bill.
I'm always there for you, buddy.
Well, one additional old guard or young guard is Dara. You've got to have a couple reflections on.
Is this a roast?
Yes,
Yeah.
apparently it's a roast.
Come at it. It's endearing. It's
Come on,
endearing.
take my seat. Come on, Dara. Come on.
No.
Go ahead.
But you might have a reflection or two from the way back when.
I think my first earliest memory of DJ was when, I think speaking at a Vegas event, and I think we were on the morning panel, like the day 2, and I just remember, DJ, as long as we're telling the roasting stories, I remember DJ had his sunglasses on the whole time because I think he was probably up all night long the night before. So, following through
A theme?
on Vince's part, maybe even still from the train ride. But what I will say, but remarkably, even if DJ had a couple of shots or whatever the night before and was staying up all night, was wearing sunglasses, still the most brilliant person on the panel. So there you go.
That's very sweet, Jared. I was deeply hungover that morning. It's true. And there does seem to be a theme, which now I'm really glad my parents are watching. So, yeah. Well, I do recall that, and I didn't actually remember that my sunglasses were on until I got on the panel and somebody said to take them off. But yeah, it was in Vegas. But aren't you supposed to do that in Vegas?
Yes.
You're supposed to do that in D.C. too.
Oh,
I've
and-
never been to.
Isn't what happens in Vegas stay in Vegas?
Apparently
I just
not,
like-
Dara. You blew.
You broke it.
I will say that of all this, and I've worked in a lot of different cities and in at least 4 different industries, possibly more. I don't know of a town where everybody drinks as early and as hard as D.C. This includes New York and London and certainly Los Angeles. This contributed to my demise. There's no doubt of that. And I don't blame it on it. I'm just saying that it was an enabler for something that was already there.
Well, I think at this point we, in DJ's honor, have a little bit of a going away present
Oh, for God's sake.
from the industry that reflects probably a lot of what he's done over the last 6 to 9 months.
Is it a spittoon?
It's as we honor you, it's a little commemorative item and a filler to address the needs.
Okay.
Gotta open it himself.
But this is for you, one of your heroes.
No, you gotta
As-
open it.
Right now.
Yeah,
When we open it
right
now,
now.
because that's usually considered rude.
No, it's okay.
It embarrasses
Yeah.
the other guests.
No, it's all right. No,
We've got one for everybody.
we got this one for you too, but we gotta share it.
Oh, fantastic! Well, it's a Donald Trump mug,
Right.
which really.
Having spent a good deal of his time late last year campaigning.
That's
Yeah.
now that we have.
It's something to put in it, I hope.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's fine.
If it comes out of it, I'll get it out.
Thank you. Oh, that's delicious.
Making
That's-
scotch great again.
That's pretty good.
You're gonna have to sift.
Making scotch necessary again. It's
Yeah.
perfect with the mug. Thank you.
Anyway,
guys
this
very much. It's
this
very
was
sweet.
it was an honor to honor one of the best and the brightest who had a tremendous indelible impact on the space. Certainly an illustrious panel here too, and that have contributed. But DJ sort of stands alone for his brilliance, his articulation, his attitude. When he wants your opinion, he gives it to you. And for all the magical moments over the last handful of years. So thank you, DJ.
We're gonna miss
Thank
you.
you.
We're gonna miss you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck to you.
Well, it's company.
Good luck.
Now open the bottle.
Good luck.
I'll be safely ensconced in Los Angeles. So come out to the coast. We'll get
And
together, have a
Portugal,
few
by the way,
laughs.
huh?
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
We know your address.
Okay.